he is a big shot, and he is one of the hardest workers in sports radio today. It is producer extraordinaire Ryan Musick, who works with Colin Cowherd on The Herd, also with the Calm Down podcast. We'll talk about these things as far as what is on Ryan's plate. I'm Bryan Fenley, an anchor at Fox Sports Radio. And of course, Ryan used to be the producer for Doug Gottlieb and the Doug Gottlieb Show. So this is an opportunity for Ryan, who has made this incredible climb up sports radio, and he deserves every moment of this to talk about his career and what he's been able to accomplish so far. And it's interesting, Ryan, because when I type your name into Google, I don't know if you've done this recently, but there's a picture of you with like Constitution Party. Like, I think there's another Ryan Musick who's running for office in Illinois, but
you didn't. I can break some news for you, Bryan. I'm leaving the sports radio industry. I'm getting into politics. No, that's a total lie. No, I have not done that recently, but that's very interesting. You know, it reminds me of there's Dan Patrick, the radio television legend in sports. And then there's also like Lieutenant Governor or something, Dan Patrick, and people are constantly tweeting him, like things because of the name mix-up. So that's interesting. I'll have to look into that.
Yeah, look into that. I was like, Ryan Musick, and it's got your picture and Constitution Party. And apparently this guy lost in 2020 in the Illinois House of Representatives. I don't think you live in Illinois last time I checked.
I do not.
What I do know is that as much as you have been able to move your career and expand it, you were quite the athlete growing up. We're talking about volleyball. We're talking about soccer. And I want to talk about your soccer career for just a second, because if I'm not mistaken, Ryan, you were a goalie.
That's right, yeah.
And so how have you had to play goalie in sports radio? And let me explain. When you've had to make a save as a producer, when you've made a great save for a host, where you've stepped in and it was a moment where you should have been commended, but nobody who was listening probably heard it. It was just you and all those behind the scenes.
Well, in the radio technical terms, a lot of times we've transitioned into a new technology, but we used to do a lot of connections through ISDNs, which is kind of like a phone connection. Well, they have a tendency to drop now and then. And when I used to do weekend overnights producing, a lot of times, it would be 3, 4 in the morning for us in LA, but you're working with hosts on the East Coast. So, 6, 7 in the morning, East Coast time. And it would be you, a board op, an update anchor. And if the connection drops, I mean, there's no one on the air until you get that connection back up. So there have been various times where, randomly, if you were anchoring, it would be the Bryan and Ryan show for, 5 minutes until whoever our technical operator is can get the host back up on air. So that would probably be one of the things that comes to mind, just because if you're listening, I mean, you have no idea what an ISDN connection is. You may not even know that the host is in Philadelphia and we're in LA. So it's just one of those situations where you certainly can't just freeze up and let there be dead air and nothing on the air. So you just got to kind of jump into action and cover until you can get the host back up.
Yeah, it definitely happened once on the Ben Maller show. He ended up driving in from his house, which is like 45 miles away. Yeah. And it was like raining cats and dogs, and he's like trying to stay on the freeway and not break any speed limits. So yeah, that was a wonderful night for the Ben Maller show. But Ryan, there's something about you, the traits, the way you carry yourself, where I knew that you had greatness in your future. And I think a lot of it and has to do with the hard work, but how studious you are at your job, and also being able to really understand and get a grasp of sports and knowing as much as you can. What is it about your work ethic that you think stands out and has allowed you to be in the position you are at your age?
Well, I mean, I think when you talk about growing up playing sports, I mean, so much of what I do now, I translate back from what I did as an athlete, which is just work hard. And I always felt as though when I first got into this business, whether it was interning or where I'm at now, it doesn't really matter how long you've been doing it. If you're willing to work the shifts that other people don't want to work, if you're willing to work harder than everyone else, I mean, I may not have the historical context to, be like, oh, well, I remember watching Magic and Showtime Lakers play. Like, well, no, but if I put in the time to research and know about it, then I can try and cover for my blind spots, even though I might not have been alive for it. And so when you talk about, working hard, how am I going to put myself into a position to compete for these jobs that we want if I've been doing it for 5, 6 years versus people have been doing it for 15 or 20? Well, I can't somehow give myself more experience, but what I can do is continue to work hard and try and make sure that my research is on par and my work ethic is on par with people who have been doing it much longer than me. As the coach cliches go, control what you can control, and I can control how hard I work and how much research and how much I care about the job that I'm trying to do.
And that's so well said. Ryan Musick is with us. I'm Bryan Fenley. How have your responsibilities as a producer shifted from Doug Gottlieb to now you being on the lot and working with Colin Cowherd?
Well, I would say, with Doug on the show that we do for just radio, it's a smaller staff just in terms of, it would be me, Dan Byer, John Ramos, Mike Lingard, and then whoever our, editor for the day was. So you're much more in control of, it's just really on you. So I'm working directly with Doug to make sure that we're covering everything that we're going to do on the show that day. And Dan has his feature segments, and he does great with those. And then Ramos is doing great with his aspects. But ultimately, trying to create most of that content and coming up with a lot of ideas to give to Lee Mayock, who's going to end up booking our guests for us. Ultimately, it's mostly coming from me. Whereas now on Colin's show with the radio and the TV staff, it's not that you're not still producing the content, it's that there's just more people there to help divide up those responsibilities. Now, instead of having to be in charge of all of these different things, I can still contribute, but know that ultimately there are other people there to also add in those type of things as well. So I can give ideas on guests if I want, but then also like Greg Toohey can do it, or Alex Rosenbaum. And then we have Dave Coelho, who's actually the talent booker. So it's the same type of responsibilities. It's just sort of spread out among more people.
What do you think you bring to the crew with the herd that nobody else does?
Well, I would say the one thing is I would say I'm a volume content type of person. I'll just put as much stuff out there as possible. Whether, if you pitch 9 topics in a day and 3 of them stick, then that's just kind of how it goes. Maybe you pitch 10 topics in a day and only 1 sticks. But I just see myself as the type of person that I'm going to do as much reading, as much research, watch as many games as possible. And I'm just going to kind of keep throwing stuff out there and not be afraid to get it shot down. And that's just sort of what I see my role as. And, some days you go 6 for 6 and you're like, wow, I'm killing it. And other days you don't. But it's okay. That's how it's going to go. We're in the business where you're filling 3 hours a day, 5 days a week. Some of your ideas are going to be great. Some of your ideas are going to be really dumb, but you can't beat yourself up over it. You just got to kind of keep plugging away and get into a habit, get into a routine, and don't get discouraged.
You spoke about at times going 6 for 6 and killing it. If I'm not mistaken, there was a time in high school when you had 34 kills.
Oh, wow. You're really digging into the archives here. Wow. Okay.
How about that for a segue? So when you think about your greatest athletic achievement, where does that stand?
That would probably be at the top. I'm trying to think. We eventually advanced to the finals for the first time in our school history for men's volleyball. So that was a great achievement, but that game wasn't, it was a good game. We won, but the efficiency at which I played that evening in the quarterfinals to go to the semifinals, that's probably going to rank up there as number 1.
Great efficiency on the volleyball court, and obviously some good game as far as the neat story in how you met your wife. And I'd love you to take us through how that was happening. If I'm not mistaken, it was with a bunch of Fox Sports Radio colleagues after work, and you guys are going out. And it was during the 2016 NBA draft?
Yeah. So 2016 NBA draft. We had Cedric Ceballos, Reed Forgrave, and Bill Ryder there hosting the draft show. I was producing it that night. And so after the show, our boss had said like, hey, we had like brought them in because a lot of them weren't living in LA at the time. So it's like, hey, make sure they get dinner afterwards. So we go over there and we get to the bar, and Aaron Larsoul, who was a producer at Fox, now he has his own podcast and does stuff with the Lakers official podcast, I believe is what it's called. Aaron was over there and ran into him. Aaron happened to know a good friend of my wife. Her name is Kate. So Aaron was talking to Kate, and then the connection was made to Kate was with my now wife, Kimberly. And so that's just sort of how we met, and we talked, and here we are years later.
Years later, and you guys got married last fall, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, we got what eventually turned into a wedding in October. It was delayed a couple of times, but hey, you just kind of keep rolling forward, and we're just happy and blessed that we were able to celebrate in every way that we could.
How does she celebrate you and encourage you and motivate you in the pursuit of what you're doing as a producer and beyond?
I mean, she is my biggest fan, and a lot of this wouldn't be possible without her. And it's crazy. I mean, you talk about my career and going back to 2016 when her and I first met. I mean, I was doing the draft show, but that was part of my schedule to do that one event because at that time, Doug wasn't with Fox. I hadn't been working with Doug yet. Had mentioned earlier, I was producing weekend overnights and then filling out a couple of, like associate producer jobs during the week to sort of get my hours there. And so when her and I met, I was a part-time weekend overnight producer living at my parents' house. And so, you want to talk about her being with me from the beginning to, where I've been so lucky and so fortunate to get with my career, and her always being understanding. I mean, we're in a position where from late August, early September through February, it's like, hey, I'm going to be here. I gotta sit here and watch, a couple of college football games. And then Sundays from, living in LA from 10 a.m. to 8:15 at night, you're dialed into the NFL games. And, throughout the NBA playoffs or most of the NBA regular season, there's, a lot of national games of the week that you're tuning in for. So she's always been a huge, huge supporter. And it's certainly, we wouldn't be where we are in our relationship and our now marriage if she wasn't so supportive and so understanding. So I'm thankful for her.
What's the best advice that she's given you about what you do?
I would say how much she believes in me has always given me a lot of confidence. So just, at times, like anyone in any profession, whether you are frustrated with certain things or you're not sure if you're really like, I think I'm doing a good job, but am I really headed to where that is? And, she'll just always say, like, I don't know if it's necessarily advice, but her just being there to be like, you're so good at what you do. Trust me, I know you're going to go on to achieve great things. Just like keep being yourself, keep doing what you're doing. Don't try and be someone that you're not, has always just given me that confidence to just be like, hey, okay, you know what? It may not be going exactly how I want it right now. So you just got to, keep your head down and keep staying true to who you are and what you do, and it'll all work out. So I'd say probably her just giving me that support and confidence to keep being me.
So after grinding and toiling for all these years, and then we fast forward to a couple years later, you get the call that they want you on the lot for the herd. What did she say, your wife, when the news first was out? And then what was the first thing you said when you took the job to celebrate?
Well, her first thing was, your alarm's going to go off at what time now? Because it's quite an early wake up call for out here. But, the first thing for me was just like, it was just kind of like a wow moment, the idea that I'd be able to now be full time on a show of that stature was, everything that you sort of work for. So I was just sort of in awe of like, you work so hard, and I have other goals that you want to keep continuing towards, but to get to that point, and it's just sort of, you find yourself going like, oh, is this real? Is this actually happening? It was a pretty great moment for sure.
Ryan Musick joins us. I'm Bryan Fenley. One of the other platforms you work with, Ryan, is the Calm Down podcast. What do you do to help put that together?
Yeah, so Calm Down with Aaron and Carissa. So I'm the producer for that as well. So we have, weekly calls where we all get together and we just sort of talk through how we want each episode to be. Very similar to whatever the TV or radio staff is. We have a talent producer, we have some technical experts who handle our video and our audio. But, being the overarching, lead on how we're bringing everything together is mostly what I do. So it's a little different than how you would do a daily type show. With what we do in national radio, it's obviously, you're hitting on these things. What's the biggest NFL story happening, NBA story? You kind of have an idea on where you're going. With this weekly podcast, we have a lot more flexibility on just sort of, we don't have an agenda on like, oh, we got to make sure we're talking NFL today, or we got to make sure we're talking about this trending story on Twitter. Like, it's just making Aaron and Carissa the stars. So it's talking with them and seeing like, okay, we have this guest. So we have an episode that we're going to be releasing soon with one of this famous dog trainers named is Jaws Leverett. And so when we get him on, it's talking with Aaron and Carissa like, hey, I think the theme of this should be talking about dogs because they're both big into dogs and dog ownership. And so it's like, what are the stories we can tell, and sort of getting their minds going on how we can structure this. Or if it's another episode that we're doing with like an actor, okay, well, do we really want to make the entire episode about that actor? Like, probably not. That's not really going to be super interesting. So maybe what are some other sort of topical things that we're going to work into the episode that kind of makes the whole thing fit together? So coming up with the content and the structure to make sure that it's just a real fun, easy listen.
Ryan Musick, the ultimate glue guy, sort of like a Mark Madsen of the Lakers. No, I'm just kidding.
All right, Mad Dog. I'm a fan.
Yeah. So when you look back at what you've done, when did you have to rely on that more than at any other time in your climb?
Yeah, I would say, definitely early on with those weekend overnights, because you just find yourself in this grinding routine of, your alarms going off at 12:50 a.m. on, what is, however you want to consider, Friday night, Saturday morning, whatever it is, and it's never, you just never get used to it, especially when it's one thing when that's your daily routine Monday through Friday, but doing that on Saturdays and Sundays, but then maybe having to do an editing shift at 7 a.m. on a Tuesday or an AP shift at 5 at night on a Thursday, you just find yourself all over the place, and you really just got to keep your head down and keep working towards that end goal and not get discouraged with like, oh man, what am I doing? Am I going to be, producing weekend overnights forever? Like, am I just going to be editing highlights, from now until I'm 70 years old and retire? And just know that the process, if you're putting in the right work and doing things the right way, it will eventually pay off. But you're going to have to grind through, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 years of doing the work that maybe no one else wants to do before you can finally get your first big break.
But with all the stuff you do behind the scenes and have done, what makes you such a natural on air?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know if I would say I'm a natural on air. I mean, look, I've certainly had my blunders. You've talked about, you mentioned Ben Maller earlier. The very first time I ever filled in and produced a show, filled in for the great Wrong Button Bob.
Oh!
Yeah, so that was a few years ago. It was the night of Thanksgiving and they were doing the NFL Pick'em, and we got through like 2 rounds. And I just remember like all of a sudden it was my turn and I just totally blanked. Couldn't think of a player. Just I could have picked anyone, but just like totally blanked on air and just was like stammering and stuttering and just couldn't come up with a name. So, it just kind of comes with time, and like I said earlier, you're going to make mistakes and you just can't like beat yourself up over it and just be like, oh, oops, next time I need to do a little bit more research so that way I don't get caught in a situation where I don't know what I'm talking about. And just kind of remind yourself like, hey, it may be national radio or whatever it is, but the more you just make it as if you're just literally talking one-on-one with someone, the more natural it will be, and you won't come off sounding awkward or like you're trying too hard or something like that. Just kind of put your mind at ease so that way you don't get overwhelmed by what may actually be happening in the moment.
How much of a natural were you when you were at CSUN and you were on the news desk?
Um, I don't know. I mean, it just, again, in college, you're just learning so much. So I pray that somehow, some way, people don't find some of those old stand-ups and whatever. I'm sure they're easily accessible in this age of YouTube. But, it's just one of those things where I loved my time at CSUN, and our professors were great with tons of feedback. So you keep trying, and you're going to embarrass yourself at times, and the great thing what they did is they just put you in as many roles as possible. So sometimes you got to anchor, sometimes you were the reporter that week, sometimes you were the producer, so you really got to get a good feel for where your strengths were through that program.
I was going to say keep trying Ryan, but that's a nickname for Ryan Bershinger after he locked himself out of the Fox Sports Radio Twitter page. And
Oh, wow.
Yeah. This is a story that Ben Maller will bring on anytime Ryan is filling in for Justin Cooper. My final question, and of course, we're joined by Ryan Musick with The Herd and the Calm Down podcast. I'm Bryan Fenley, an anchor at FSR. And that is, Ryan, what does Greg Toohey do to really help you and build you? And how have you been able to use his experiences to help expand and grow The Herd?
Oh, Tui. Look, I owe a lot to Greg. He was the producer for Jay Moore day one when I walked into Fox Sports Radio as an intern almost, let's see, that was like about 8 years ago now. So, I owe a lot to Greg. He's always been there to answer whatever questions that I've had. You walk in day one at an internship. I didn't know anything about producing a national radio show. So just showing you how things work, it's a competitive industry. So you never know what people may or may not be willing to share with you, because that's just the nature of how a lot of highly competitive business places can be. But Greg has never been that person. He's always been open and willing, like, oh, hey, here, let me show you how to build a rundown. Let me show you how to do this. And then always been a supporter of me, whether it was with Jay's show and I became an employee, he would take time off and he would go like, oh no, Musick can handle it. Just let him fill in for me. And same thing when he took over for Colin, it was like, oh, I'm going to take time off. We should just have Musick fill in. So, opening those doors, opening those pathways, and, being someone who's in my corner and who would advocate for me and give me those opportunities so that I could show that I was able and capable to fill in these roles for people who may have more years of experience, but I may have been doing it for less time, but just as capable, if not more than capable than them. And joining the staff full time, same type of situation when John Goulet left, which congratulations to him and his new position. But when he left, it was the same thing. Greg's like, hey, look, what makes the most sense is someone like Ryan, who's already worked with Colin. And now that I'm there, him always empowering me to be like, hey, just let your voice be heard. Don't be afraid. Just like whenever we need topics or content or whatever, just like put yourself out there. Like, again, that support and belief to make sure that I'm fitting in and doing what I'm supposed to be doing. And I don't have to be doubting myself, and I don't have to be worried about like, am I doing this the right way? Am I, I'm not, don't be worried about trying to be John Goulet. Like, just be yourself. Like, it's okay. He did it his way. You can do it your way. So just, what you're doing, you fit in well with the crew, and Colin likes you. So just keep going forward and don't sweat it.
I was going to say that was my last question. I promise you, Ryan, this is my last question. I
As
had
many
to.
last questions as you need, Brian.
Okay.
Go ahead, man.
I had a follow up. What is the best idea that you've presented to Colin that he
Oh.
has loved the most from you?
Best idea. I mean, I don't know. I think maybe you'd have to ask Colin what was the best idea and what he loved the most. I mean, I guess I would think the most creative and outside the box would probably be with the so this was about a month ago now, maybe a little over a month ago, with the whole Baker Mayfield UFO tweet and then the Tom Brady, that whole thing. Well, as a staff, we tried to come up with as many different creative ways as possible to sort of just come at this, right? Because, it's a great moment for the show. Tom Brady's tweeting at Colin. It really, helps raise the profile. And there wasn't a whole lot going on in the world of sports. So it's like, are you going to talk and react to just like another regular season NBA game, or are you going to use this moment to really, try and capitalize on it? So trying to come up with as many ways as possible to talk about it. And so I pitched this idea that everything that Tom Brady does for Colin is the exception. And so, like, if Baker Mayfield is talking about UFOs, may not be okay. But if Tom Brady does it, then that's the exception because he's Tom Brady. And it was the same thing that we've done after they won the Super Bowl. Colin's, his whole thing is no backwards hat. Quarterbacks do not wear backwards hat. But after Tom Brady wins a seventh Super Bowl, it's okay. Tom Brady can wear his hat, he can wear his hat backwards. And so I pitched this idea that Tom Brady is the great exception for Colin. And so we did like a faux movie trailer and made like a poster about, how it's kind of almost like a love story kind of theme that, like, Colin makes all these rules, but for Tom Brady, that's his one great exception. And so we kind of played it up, produced it, and, it was a little bit on the show for like 3 minutes. So that's probably the most unique thing that I could think of. Other than that, it's just another hot take of the day.
And that is why they have Ryan Musick working on that show. Ryan, as competitive as this business is, I also know you're very competitive when it comes to beach volleyball. People need to know that you're really good. You've won a lot of matches. So I wanted to make sure I squeeze that in as well. Really appreciate you, Ryan, for sharing your story. So happy for you. You deserve it. You put in so much work. I can see it. And I really appreciate you. I'm Bryan Fenley.
Thanks so much, Brian. Anytime, man.